At my Mother's Day brunch, while I was cutting my cake and smiling at my family, I heard my son whisper to his wife, "Mom costs too much to support now." I finished my slice, hugged everyone goodbye, and within 72 hours, I had withdrawn the money that was keeping his business alive. What my son didn't know was that I wasn't just his mother living in his house, I was his silent business partner, his landlord, and the financial foundation holding up everything he thought he'd built himself. For almost 2 years, I had been funding his success while he saw me as nothing more than an expensive burden taking up space in his home. You see, when people think you're poor and dependent, they forget to watch what they say around you. They forget that you might be listening when they discuss putting you in assisted living so they can turn your room into a social media studio. They forget that the costly mother they're complaining about might actually be the one paying for the roof over their heads. My name is Ruth, and I'm about to tell you how a whispered conversation on Mother's Day taught my family exactly what losing me would cost them. Because sometimes, the most generous thing you can do for ungrateful people is to stop being generous. By the time I was done, they learned that their costly mother was worth more than they could have ever imagined, and they discovered that when you treat someone like a burden, you might just lose the very person who's been your foundation all along. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning and tell you how a bank manager who thought she was helping her family discovered she was actually enabling people who couldn't wait to get rid of her. Before we continue, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and subscribe for more stories like mine. My name is Ruth Morrison. I'm 67 years old, and I live in Tampa, Florida. 2 years ago, I lost my husband of 43 years to a sudden heart attack, and my world changed completely. We had been planning our retirement together, looking forward to traveling and spending time with our family. Instead, I found myself a widow, trying to figure out how to build a new life without the man who had been my partner in everything. I had worked as a bank manager for 35 years, so I understood money, investments, and how to plan for the future. My husband and I had been careful savers, and when he passed, he left me more financially comfortable than anyone in my family realized. You see, my husband's family had owned a successful citrus farm outside Tampa that sold for a substantial amount just before he died. Combined with my own retirement savings from decades in banking, I was in a position where I could help my family in ways they never imagined. After the funeral, my son Michael invited me to stay with him and his wife Jessica temporarily while I settled my husband's affairs. They said I shouldn't be alone during such a difficult time, and I was grateful for their concern. Michael owned a landscaping business here in Tampa, and they had a nice house in a good neighborhood. At the time, I thought moving in with them would bring us closer together during my grief. What they didn't know was the extent of what my husband had left behind. Besides our regular savings, there was money from the family farm sale, insurance policies, and investments I had built over decades of working in finance. I had always lived modestly, driving my old Honda and shopping carefully, so my family saw me as someone on a fixed retirement income who needed their support. About a year after I moved in, when the fog of grief had lifted somewhat, I noticed Michael's business was struggling with cash flow. The Florida landscaping market is competitive, especially during the slower summer months when the heat makes outdoor work challenging. I watched my son stress about payroll, equipment payments, and securing bigger contracts that could stabilize his income. That's when I made a decision that I thought showed how much I loved my family. Through my attorney, I quietly invested a substantial amount in Michael's business, through a family trust my husband had established. I structured it carefully so Michael would think the funding came from his father's business planning and estate arrangements. I wanted him to feel proud of his success, not beholden to his mother's charity. I also discovered that Michael's business was operating from a commercial property that was actually owned through our family trust. The property deed was still in my husband's name, and I realized I could help Michael by letting him use the space without the burden of commercial rent. In Tampa's business district, commercial rent can be substantial, so this was saving him thousands every month. But I never mentioned it directly. I let him think it was just a fortunate family arrangement from his father's estate. As his grandmother, I also wanted to help secure my granddaughter Emma's future. She's 16 now, a bright girl with dreams of studying environmental science in college. I quietly funded her entire college savings account. but I made sure the contributions appeared to come through the family trust in ways that made Michael look like the responsible father who was planning ahead for his daughter's education. I've always believed in helping family, but I also believed in doing it with dignity. I backed their credit accounts to help them get better rates, paid for home improvements as gifts, and always downplayed where the money was coming from. I wanted them to see Michael as a successful provider, not realize that his success depended on his mother's careful financial planning and generosity. Everything was structured through my attorney, so it looked legitimate and permanent. I kept detailed records of every contribution and investment, but I never made them feel indebted or reminded them of what I was doing. I thought this was what good mothers did. We help our children succeed, and then step back so they can take pride in their accomplishments. I dressed simply, drove my same reliable car, and never flaunted money. I wanted them to see me as their loving mother and grandmother, someone who was grateful for their kindness and letting me live with them during my difficult transition to widowhood. I thought I was being a good mother, helping my family build security while allowing them to maintain their dignity and independence. For almost 2 years, I lived this way, quietly generous, modestly dressed, grateful for their hospitality. I helped with household chores, babysat Emma when needed, and tried to contribute to family life without being intrusive. I thought we were building the kind of close, multi-generational family relationship that would carry us all forward into the future. I had no idea that my generosity was being seen as dependence, or that my presence in their home was being viewed as a burden rather than a blessing. I thought I was a welcome part of their lives, contributing both financially and emotionally to our family's success and happiness. How wrong I was about that. As months turned into a year, then stretched toward 2 years, I started noticing changes in how Jessica treated me. At first, it was subtle things. She would sigh when I asked to use the washing machine, or make comments about how much extra the utilities cost with an additional person in the house. I tried to be understanding. After all, they hadn't planned on a permanent houseguest when they invited me to stay temporarily. Jessica had been trying to build some kind of social media presence around home decorating and lifestyle content. She was always rearranging furniture for photos and filming herself cooking or organizing closets. She started complaining that having me around made it difficult to create the content she wanted. "I need the house to look perfect," she would say. "And it's hard when there are personal items and extra furniture everywhere." I began keeping my belongings confined to my room and being extra careful not to leave anything in the common areas. But it never seemed to be enough. Jessica would make comments about needing space and how the house felt crowded even when I was quietly reading in my room. I heard her on the phone with friends, talking about her life and mentioning casually, "I love Michael, but his mother just won't leave. We thought it would be temporary, but here we are almost 2 years later." When she realized I might have overheard, she would give me forced smiles and change the subject. The financial complaints started slowly. Jessica began mentioning how much extra groceries cost, pointing out that feeding 3 adults instead of 2 was straining their budget. She would comment on the increased water bill when I took longer showers, or mention the higher electric costs when I used the air conditioning in my room during Tampa's brutal summer heat. Michael, who had always been protective of me and grateful for my presence, slowly started agreeing with Jessica's complaints. He began making comments about the extra expenses of having me there. He would nod along when Jessica talked about utility costs or grocery bills, as if these were significant hardships for a family whose business was thriving. What made this especially painful was that I knew exactly why their business was doing so well. Michael was taking on bigger landscaping contracts, hiring additional employees, and purchasing new equipment. He was proud of his success and would talk about his business skills and how well he was managing growth. He had convinced himself that his prosperity came from his hard work and business acumen, never connecting it to the financial foundation I had quietly provided. Jessica started posting on social media about their successful business owner lifestyle, showing off their nice dinners out, weekend trips, and home improvements. She would caption photos with things like, "So grateful for my hardworking husband," and "living our best life thanks to Michael's business success." Meanwhile, she was complaining to me about the cost of an extra load of laundry. The conversations that hurt most were the ones that stopped when I entered a room. I would walk into the kitchen and find Michael and Jessica speaking in hushed tones, only to have them suddenly switch to normal conversation about the weather or Emma's school activities. I knew they were discussing me, but I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid. Emma, my granddaughter, started avoiding me too. She was becoming a teenager and naturally spending more time with friends, but I noticed she seemed uncomfortable during family conversations, when her parents made their subtle complaints about household expenses. Sometimes I would catch her looking at me with what seemed like pity, as if she had been told I was struggling financially. The small cruelties accumulated. When I got sick with a bad cold during the rainy season, Jessica made comments about bringing germs into the house and how she couldn't afford to get sick because of her responsibilities. When I offered to cook dinner to help out, she would find reasons why my recipes wouldn't work or weren't what the family wanted. They began making plans for holidays and family activities without including me. "We thought you'd prefer to rest, Mom," Michael would say when I discovered they had tickets to a Lightning hockey game or reservations at a nice restaurant. "We didn't want to assume you'd want to go out," but they never asked what I might prefer. I started eating meals in my room more often to avoid the tension at the family dinner table. When they did include me, the conversation felt forced and uncomfortable. Jessica would make pointed comments about their budget concerns, or how challenging it was to manage a household with limited resources. The irony was devastating. While they complained about supporting their expensive mother, Michael's business was experiencing the most successful period in its history. He was landing major commercial contracts, expanding his services, and building a reputation as one of Tampa's premier landscaping companies. Jessica was able to stay home and pursue her social media dreams instead of working a traditional job. All of this success was built on the financial foundation I had provided, but they had forgotten that completely. Michael genuinely believed his prosperity was the result of his father's good estate planning and his own business talents. He had no memory of struggling with cash flow or worrying about equipment payments. In his mind, those problems had been solved by his inheritance and smart financial management. Jessica posted photos of their renovated kitchen and new patio furniture, crediting their financial planning and Michael's business success. She never mentioned that these improvements were possible because they didn't pay commercial rent for his business location, or that their credit rating allowed them favorable loan terms because of backing they didn't even realize they had. I felt more lonely living with my family than I had felt living alone after my husband died. At least when I was grieving by myself, I knew the isolation was temporary and circumstantial. This loneliness felt personal and permanent. I was surrounded by people who saw me as a burden while I was secretly the foundation of their comfortable lifestyle. But I kept quiet and tried to make myself smaller, hoping that if I was less visible and less demanding, maybe the tension would decrease. I helped with household chores without being asked, babysat Emma whenever needed, and tried to contribute positively to family life while taking up as little space as possible. I told myself that this was normal adjustment period stress, that families needed time to find their rhythm when living situations changed. I convinced myself that their complaints were just temporary frustrations, not a fundamental shift in how they saw me. I had no idea how much worse things were about to get, or that they were already making plans for my future that didn't include asking what I wanted. Despite everything that had been building up, I was genuinely looking forward to Mother's Day. I thought it might be a chance to reconnect with my family and remind ourselves of what we meant to each other. Jessica had actually seemed excited about planning what she called a special brunch, and for the first time in months, I let myself hope that things might be improving between us. I woke up early that Sunday morning feeling optimistic. The Florida sunshine was streaming through my bedroom window, and I could hear Jessica moving around in the kitchen, apparently preparing something special. I got dressed in my favorite blue dress, the one my husband always said brought out my eyes, and went to help with the preparations. Jessica had set the dining room table with my good china that I had brought from my own house when I moved in. She had bought flowers for a centerpiece and even put out the cloth napkins instead of paper ones. "I want everything to be perfect for you today, Ruth," she said with what seemed like genuine warmth. For a moment it felt like the daughter-in-law relationship I had always hoped we could have. Emma came downstairs with a handmade card she had created at school. It was decorated with pressed flowers, and had a sweet message about appreciating grandmothers. Michael appeared with a generic World's Best Mom card from the drugstore, and a small gift bag containing some lavender hand lotion. The gestures were simple, but they felt sincere, and I found myself tearing up with gratitude. We all gathered around the table, and the conversation was lighter than it had been in months. Emma was telling us about a science project she was working on about Florida's ecosystem, and Michael was sharing a funny story about a client who wanted him to landscape their yard to look exactly like a golf course. We were all laughing, and I felt the familiar warmth of being surrounded by people I loved. Jessica had ordered a German chocolate cake from my favorite bakery downtown, the same kind my husband used to get for my birthday every year. "I remembered how much you love German chocolate," she said as she brought it to the table. I wanted today to be special. I was touched that she had remembered this detail, and taken the trouble to get something she knew would make me happy. As I stood up to cut the cake, I was thinking about how grateful I was for my family. Despite our recent difficulties, I was focused on cutting even slices, making sure everyone got a good portion with plenty of frosting. I was thinking about my husband and how he would have enjoyed seeing us all together like this, celebrating and enjoying each other's company. That's when I heard Michael lean over toward Jessica and whisper something. At first, I didn't catch the words clearly, but then I heard him say distinctly, "Mom costs too much to support now. We need to start looking at other options." My hand froze on the knife, but I kept my eyes on the cake. I had learned from decades in banking how to keep my expression neutral even when receiving shocking information. I continued cutting as if I hadn't heard anything unusual. Jessica whispered back, "I've been saying this for months, Michael. She's eating into our savings, and I'm honestly tired of pretending we can afford this arrangement much longer." I placed the first slice on a plate and reached for the second one, my movements steady, despite the fact that my heart was breaking. These were the same people who had been laughing with me moments before, the same people who had set the table with my china and ordered my favorite cake. Michael replied quietly, "I feel guilty about it, but you're right. Dad's gone now and we just can't support her forever. Maybe it's time to seriously look at those assisted living places we researched." I served the first slice to Emma, who was oblivious to her parents' conversation and was showing me pictures on her phone of her science project. My hands didn't shake as I cut the second piece. Jessica added, "She really doesn't contribute anything financially, Michael. She just takes up space and costs us money every month. The utilities, the food, the extra wear and tear on everything. It's not sustainable." I served Michael his slice with a smile, as if we were still having the pleasant family celebration that had existed just minutes before. But inside, I was calculating exactly how much I had contributed to their unsustainable lifestyle. Michael said, "You're right about the room situation too. We could really use that space for something more productive. Your studio idea makes a lot more sense than having it tied up indefinitely." Jessica responded, "Exactly. She'll probably be happier around people her own age anyway, and we'll finally have our house back and our privacy restored. It's really a win-win situation when you think about it." I served Jessica her cake and sat down with my own slice, participating in Emma's excited chatter about her project while processing every word I had just heard. They thought I was a financial burden who contributed nothing while costing them money every month. They wanted to put me in assisted living so Jessica could turn my room into her social media studio. They felt like they were sacrificing their privacy and their house to support their expensive mother. The conversation at the table continued normally. Emma was explaining something about mangrove ecosystems. Michael was complimenting the cake, and Jessica was taking photos for her social media. "Perfect Mother's Day with family," she said, as she posed us all for a picture. "So grateful for moments like these." I smiled for the photo and told them what a lovely Mother's Day it had been. I hugged Michael and thanked him for the card and lotion. I hugged Jessica and praised her for organizing such a thoughtful celebration. I told Emma how much her handmade card meant to me, and how proud I was of her science project. As I hugged them goodbye, I was already planning what I would do next. My bank manager training had taught me that the most important thing in any crisis is accurate information and careful planning. I now had very accurate information about how my family really felt about me and our living arrangement. That night, as I sat in what they considered my room in their house, I replayed every word of their whispered conversation. They thought I was dependent on their charity while I was actually the foundation of their comfortable lifestyle. They wanted to warehouse me with strangers so they could reclaim space in a house that was only affordable because of financial arrangements they had completely forgotten about. They saw me as a burden who contributed nothing, while I was quietly ensuring their business success, their favorable credit terms, and their daughter's educational future. They talked about not being able to afford supporting me while living a lifestyle that was entirely dependent on support I was providing without their knowledge or acknowledgement. But the most painful part wasn't their ingratitude about money. It was the casual way they discussed disposing of me, as if I were a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. They talked about putting me away as if it were a practical decision that would benefit everyone, including me. As I lay awake that night, I wasn't feeling sorry for myself. I was feeling coldly angry and very, very clear about what needed to happen next. My family was about to learn exactly what it cost when you decided that supporting someone was too expensive, especially when that someone had been supporting you all along. Within 72 hours, they were going to discover what their life looked like without their costly mother. And I was going to find out what my life looked like when I stopped enabling people who couldn't wait to get rid of me. I didn't sleep that night. But it wasn't from hurt feelings or emotional devastation. My bank manager mind had taken over, and I was thinking clearly and strategically for the first time in months. I lay in the dark, calculating exactly how much Michael and Jessica would lose if I withdrew my support, and the numbers were staggering. As the hours passed, I realized that my family had been living in a complete fantasy. They believed they were successful business owners who were generously supporting their needy mother. The reality was that they were entirely dependent on the burden they were planning to dispose of. They had no idea how precarious their situation actually was. Monday morning couldn't come fast enough. At exactly 9 o'clock, I called my attorney Robert Chen, who had handled my husband's estate and all the family trust arrangements. "Robert," I said, "I need to understand exactly what financial power I have regarding my son's business and our family arrangements." Robert immediately pulled up my files. "Ruth, let me review what we have here," he said. "You've got significant involvement in your son's business success, through several different financial structures." He started listing my assets and arrangements. The business investment was substantial and was structured as a revocable trust that I controlled completely. The commercial property where Michael's business operated was owned through our family trust, with the deed still in my husband's name. Michael had been using it rent-free as a family benefit, but there was no legal obligation for me to continue that arrangement. "Ruth," Robert said carefully, "you're not just supporting them. You're essentially their silent business partner and landlord. Without your involvement, Michael's business would need to find significant capital immediately and secure commercial space at market rates." I asked Robert to calculate exactly what my support was worth annually. The commercial property alone would rent for substantial monthly amounts at market rate. The business investment had provided the capital Michael needed for equipment, payroll, and expansion. Plus, I had been backing their credit accounts, which allowed them to secure favorable terms on loans and credit lines. "If you withdrew all support," Robert said, "they would need to replace over $90,000 in annual benefits immediately, plus find hundreds of thousands in capital investment. Most businesses can't survive that kind of sudden change." I asked about my legal rights. Robert explained that everything was structured as family trust arrangements that I controlled. The commercial property lease is a family accommodation, not a legal contract. The business investment can be withdrawn with proper notice. You have complete legal authority to terminate these arrangements. "What about Emma's college fund?" I asked. That was my one concern. My granddaughter was innocent in all of this. "That's in a separate educational trust that you control directly," Robert assured me. "It's completely protected and has nothing to do with Michael's business arrangements. Emma's future is secure regardless of what you decide about the other financial support." I told Robert about the Mother's Day conversation, exactly what I had heard about being too costly and their plans for assisted living. He was quiet for a moment before saying, "Ruth, I'm sorry they treated you that way. You have every legal right to withdraw your support. They have no claim to continued assistance." "I want to do this properly and completely," I told him. "They said I cost too much. I want them to learn what losing me actually costs." Robert asked if I was certain. This will likely destroy Michael's business within 90 days. They'll face immediate financial crisis and have to make major lifestyle changes. They were planning to put me in assisted living so Jessica could have a social media studio. I replied. They've already made their choice about what kind of relationship they want with me. We spent the next hour planning the withdrawal strategy. The business investment would be terminated with proper notice. The commercial property arrangement would end, requiring Michael to pay market rate rent or find alternative space. All credit backing would be removed, requiring them to secure their own financing based on their actual creditworthiness. Robert also helped me research senior living options. I could easily afford an upscale independent living community with my own apartment, social activities, and meal plans. Ruth, you have substantial assets, he reminded me. You can live very comfortably wherever you choose. By Tuesday, I had toured 3 different senior communities and selected a beautiful place called Sunset Manor. It had spacious apartments, a library, art studios, and organized activities. The residents I met seemed engaged and friendly. I could have my own space, my own schedule, and relationships with people who actually wanted my company. Wednesday, I signed the lease on my new apartment and arranged for movers. I had accumulated very few possessions during my time at Michael's house, so the transition would be simple. Most of my furniture and personal items were still in storage from when I had sold my original house. Thursday, Robert's office prepared all the legal documents. The business investment withdrawal notice, the commercial property rental agreement termination, and the credit backing removal paperwork. Everything was perfectly legal and professionally documented. I also spent time that week thinking about whether I was being too harsh. But every time I reconsidered, I remembered their exact words about me costing too much and their casual discussion of putting me away so they could reclaim their space. They hadn't been talking about a temporary arrangement or family discussion. They had been planning my disposal as if I were a problem to be solved. Friday morning, I was ready. At exactly 9 o'clock, Robert's office sent all the legal documents by certified mail and email. The business investment withdrawal notice gave Michael 30 days to arrange replacement capital. The property rental termination required him to start paying market rate immediately or vacate within 30 days. The credit backing removal would take effect in 60 days. My phone started ringing at 9:15. Michael was calling from his business office, and I could hear the panic in his voice even before he spoke. Mom, what is this? Some lawyer is saying you're taking money out of my business? I don't understand what's happening. I kept my voice calm and professional. The same business you built with money you thought came from your father's estate planning. What do you mean? Mom, you're scaring me. This doesn't make any sense. Michael, I said clearly. I heard what you said on Mother's Day, that I cost too much to support, and you needed to look at other options. He tried to deny it, but I quoted him exactly. She doesn't contribute anything financially, just takes up space and costs money every month. The silence on the phone told me he realized I had heard their entire conversation. You and Jessica decided I was too expensive and started planning to put me in assisted living so she could have her studio, I continued. Well, now you're going to learn what expensive really looks like. Mom, please. We can talk about this. We never meant. You meant every word, I interrupted. And now you're going to live with the consequences of those words. Jessica grabbed the phone from Michael. Ruth, you can't do this. You'll ruin our lives. We're family. Family doesn't plan to warehouse their mother so they can turn her room into a social media studio, I replied calmly. We never said that. You said exactly that. I have excellent hearing, and I remember every word. Jessica was crying now. We didn't mean it the way it sounded. We love you. You can't just destroy everything we've built. Everything you think you built was built with my support, I told her. Support you never acknowledged, never appreciated, and never even remembered. Now you'll have the chance to build something on your own. Michael got back on the phone. Mom, please. The business will fail. We'll lose everything. You were already planning to lose me, I said. Now you get to choose what matters more. I hung up the phone and turned it off. By the weekend, I would be moved into my new apartment. By the end of the month, Michael would be learning how to run a business without the financial foundation his mother had been providing. And I would be starting a new life where the people around me actually wanted my company instead of just tolerating my presence while they planned my disposal. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely excited about my future. Within 3 weeks of receiving those legal documents, Michael's business began crumbling exactly as Robert had predicted. Without my capital investment, he couldn't meet payroll for his employees. He had to let go of most of his staff, keeping only his most essential workers and taking on much of the physical labor himself again. The commercial property situation became impossible almost immediately. Michael couldn't secure a business loan to replace my investment without my credit backing, and no bank would approve him based on his actual financial history once they discovered the true source of his previous success. The monthly rent he now owed was more than his reduced business could generate in profit. By the 60-day mark, Michael was forced to close his landscaping business entirely. He had to liquidate his equipment to pay remaining debts and employee severances. The trucks, the commercial mowers, the specialized tools that had made him competitive in Tampa's landscaping market, all of it had to be sold to cover what he owed. A new tenant moved into the commercial property within a month, paying full market rate for the space. It was a small accounting firm that appreciated the location and was happy to pay what the property was actually worth. I was earning more from that property in rental income than I had ever taken from Michael's business arrangement. Michael and Jessica had to give up their house. Without the business income and faced with the reality of what their lifestyle actually cost, they couldn't afford the mortgage payments. They moved into a small apartment across town and both had to find regular employment for the first time in years. Jessica's dreams of becoming a social media influencer evaporated along with their comfortable lifestyle. Instead of filming content about home decorating and business success, she got a job at a local retail store. The studio she had wanted to create in my room became irrelevant when they could barely afford basic rent. Michael found work with another landscaping company as a regular employee. After years of being the boss, he was back to doing physical labor for someone else's business. The irony wasn't lost on me that he was now working for a company that operated exactly the way his business could have if he had truly built it himself. The most satisfying part wasn't their financial struggles, though those were certainly educational for them. The most satisfying part was my new life at Sunset Manor. I had a beautiful one-bedroom apartment with a view of Tampa Bay. I could see the water from my living room window, and the sunsets were spectacular. I made friends immediately. My neighbor Helen and I started a book club that met weekly in the community library. We were reading everything from mystery novels to biographies, and our discussions were intellectually stimulating in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Helen was also a widow who had raised successful children, and she understood the complicated emotions of family relationships. I joined the art class offered twice a week and discovered I had a talent for watercolor painting. I painted scenes of Tampa Bay, Florida wildlife and memories from my life with my husband. The art instructor, a retired teacher named Margaret, encouraged me to display my work in the community center, and several pieces sold to other residents. The volunteer opportunities were wonderful too. Helen and I started helping at the local library's literacy program, working with adults who were learning to read. It was rewarding work that used my professional skills in a meaningful way. I also joined a group that visited elementary schools to read to children, sharing my love of books with a new generation. I was taking trips for the first time since my husband died. The senior center organized outings to cultural events in Tampa, weekend trips to other Florida cities, and even a cruise to the Caribbean that winter. I was meeting people, trying new restaurants, and engaging with life in ways I hadn't done while I was living with Michael's family. Emma was the only family member who reached out to me directly. She came to visit me at Sunset Manor about 2 months after I moved out, and I could see she was struggling with everything that had happened. "Grandma," she said, "I'm sorry we took you for granted. I had no idea you were supporting everything. I feel terrible about how Mom and Dad treated you." I assured Emma that my decisions had nothing to do with her and that her college fund remained completely intact. "Your education is secure, sweetheart," I told her. "I made sure of that before I made any other changes. Your future was never at risk." Emma asked if I was lonely or regretted my decision. I showed her around my apartment, introduced her to Helen and some of my other friends, and let her see my artwork. Honey, I said. I'm happier now than I've been since your grandfather died. I'm living with people who enjoy my company instead of people who see me as a burden. She spent the afternoon with me, meeting my friends and seeing how engaged I was with my new life. When she left, she said, "Grandma, you seem like yourself again. I missed that version of you." Michael and Jessica sent desperate messages for months, begging me to work something out or reconsider our arrangement. But I had learned an important lesson about enabling people who don't appreciate your help. When someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. I made sure Emma understood that she was always welcome in my life and that my decisions were about boundaries, not punishment. She started visiting me regularly, often bringing her science projects to show me or asking for help with college applications. Our relationship actually became closer without the tension of living in the same house with her parents. 6 months after moving to Sunset Manor, I was genuinely happier than I had been since my husband died. I had my dignity back, my independence, and relationships with people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide for them. I learned to salsa dance in the community center's dance class. I joined an investment club where we researched stocks and shared financial strategies. I even started dating a widower named Frank, who lived on the third floor and made me laugh every day. The business failure had taught Michael and Jessica exactly what it costs when you lose someone who loves you. But more importantly, it taught me that it's never too late to choose yourself and build a life where you're truly appreciated. To anyone listening who feels like a burden to their family, I want you to know that you're probably worth more than you realize. Keep records of your generosity, because people have a way of forgetting what you've done for them. And remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop enabling people who don't value your love. I'm 67 years old. I'm financially independent, and I'm surrounded by people who light up when they see me coming, instead of people who wish I would disappear. It took me almost 70 years to learn that lesson, but I'm so grateful I learned it while I still had time to enjoy the results. So, that's my story. I'd love to hear what you think. Have you ever discovered that standing up for yourself later in life led to more happiness and better relationships than you expected? Let me know in the comments, and subscribe if you want to hear more stories like mine.